Can you see me and hear me?
See you. I can see you and hear you.
Okay, I just can't see myself. I think we're doing this screensaver thing again. All right, so good morning, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Thursday, July 8th, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual hearing on docket 0654, ordinance amending CBC chapter, oh, sorry, I think I have opening statement for another. I do, my apologies, 1 second. Let me get the right docket number up, 1 second.
You scared me for a minute there.
It's for the cannabis ordinance. I'm printing out the other one. My apologies. I'm going to do a redo in a couple seconds. Good to see you, Cheryl. Are we also joined by? We have Cheryl, and is Tanisha coming as well? Councilor Arroyo?
So I spoke with her last night. I do believe she's coming.
Okay.
So we'll just see if she gets here.
All right. So because I have Tanisha and Cheryl Crawford. Sabina is here. Yep. All right. So that's good. We'll have enough summary. I'm sure by the time we finish all the summary and go back and forth and intro, she'll be here. Okay. All right. And I'll have my intro remarks shortly. Here we go again. Good morning. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It's Thursday, July 8th, and we're here today for a virtual hearing on docket 0602, petition for a special law regarding an act relative to early voting options for City of Boston municipal elections, and docket 0603, petition for special law, an act relative to same-day voter registration for City of Boston municipal elections. This was both referred to the committee on April 28th, 2021, and Councilor Arroyo is the sponsor of both dockets. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Act of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law, we are relieving that relieve public bodies of certain requirements, including requirement that public hearings be accessible by the public. We are holding this hearing via Zoom, and this hearing will be recorded. This enables the City Council to carry out its business, but also balance the public safety needs of the moment. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and live on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It would also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be part of the record and available to all councilors. Quick summary. Docket 0602 would allow early voting options in municipal elections and would establish procedures for early voting. Docket 0603 would allow for same-day voter registration and for voting on that day of such registration, whether it's on election day or during an early voting period. Section 2 of the proposal established standards for proof of residence. Joining the committee today on behalf of the administration is Sabina Palante, Assistant Registrar of the Boston Elections Department. We also have Councilor Arroyo as the lead sponsor of both dockets. We've also been joined by Councilor Liz Braden. We also have guest speakers who will be on a panel. Tanisha Sullivan, who will be joining us from the NAACP Boston branch. She's the president, as well as Cheryl Crawford from Mass Vote, who is the executive director. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Arroyo for some opening remarks, then Councilor Braden. Then we'll go straight to the administration and the advocates. Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to just note before we begin, there is one typo in the docket, docket 0603 that we're going to address in the working session. As it's currently written, it isn't as clear as it should be. Same day voter registration is really election day voter registration. Okay, and so that's not for all of the early voting days that are possible. That just means that on whatever that preliminary date may be that year, whatever that general election date that year is, you can go vote and register on that day, that specific day, whatever that election day is, not the early voting days. And so to get directly into what this is about, we just celebrated July 4th. People who are from Boston or from New England or are close to a history book understand Boston and Massachusetts specific role to play in creating our democracy. It only makes sense that as a city, as the engine sort of Massachusetts, we are driving the discussion on voter access and voter rights and ensuring that more people can participate. And what we saw this year due to the pandemic, due to an increase in voter access, which is really what this was, it allowed folks to participate that are disabled, that may have multiple jobs, that may have different life responsibilities and things that they're juggling. And what it really did was an increased participation in our democracy, which is a really beautiful thing. What this would do, which is separate and apart from what folks may have heard is happening and there's like multiple bills going through the Senate and the House, but the one that most people tend to talk about is the mail by voting. It's what we did when we moved the date of our elections from September 21st to September 14th to allow for mail voting. We still don't have that because the House has not extended that. But even if they did extend that, it would only cover this most recent municipal election. It's not a permanent fix. And so these home rule petitions essentially are a way for the city of Boston, for the city council to say, these are the things we would like to see permanently in place in our elections. And specifically what this puts in place, and I'll go through it very quickly, is it would allow for early voting for City of Boston municipal elections. It would allow for no excuse vote by mail for City of Boston municipal elections. It would allow for the election department to tabulate absent and early voting ballot dates before the date of the election. It would allow for voters to return ballots via delivering them in person to the election department, a secure drop box, or mailing to the election department. All of those methods are things we did already in the most recent presidential election. And it would allow for same day as the preliminary or same day as the general election registration of vote. In other words, if you aren't registered to vote, but you live here and you are qualified to vote, you can show up to your precinct or your polling place on the day of the election and actually register to vote there that day. And so these are some basic things. I would love to say that we're leading on voter access or voter rights, but these are things that happen already in other places. These are just good ideas. These are things we should already be doing. And so with that, I think, and I would just want to say and thank, when I was putting this together, I worked in partnership with the NAACP, but also with the Secretary of State's office in ensuring that what we were doing, they apparently had already been having, and I'm sure Mr. Piemonte will speak to this, they had already spoken to multiple election departments throughout the state as to what is feasible, what works best, what works better. And we tapped into that knowledge as well as talking to the Boston Election Department as well. So I'm excited to have Sabino here today as well to speak to sort of some of these election things and what their impact on the city could be and what their impact on the election department is. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Councillor Arroyo for bringing this issue up for discussion and try and implement. I support broadening the franchise and making sure that more people are able to vote successfully without impediment. So I look forward to the conversation today with regard to voter registration, election day voter registration, to keep it accurate, and just trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of implementing a new policy. But thank you. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you. Madam Chair, I don't think we hear you.
Thank you. Just to be very brief, I'm excited about the conversation. I do know that ultimately both of these are helpful. And I actually think where a lot of the country is moving towards restricting access to voting, I think it's wonderful that we're moving in the opposite direction and actually expanding people's options to be able to vote and be informed. I think that I'm looking forward to the practical implications at the city level and learning from Sabino how he sees this playing out. And then we will turn it over to Cheryl. And I think, again, whenever Tanisha joins us, she will be free to have some comments on both dockets. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Sabino Piemonte.
order, Madam Chair, all councilors present and committee members. Thank you for holding this session today. My name is Sabino Piemonte. I'm the head assistant registrar of voters. This department provides fair and equitable elections in a safe manner. At this moment, the preliminary municipal election is scheduled for September 14th with a deadline to register to vote of August 25th. The municipal election is scheduled for November 2nd. The last day to register to vote is October 13th. Deadline for absentee ballot applications, requesting them in mail will be Wednesday, September 8th and October 27th respectively for the September and November elections before 5 p.m. However, vote in person will still be available in City Hall, room 241, up until 12 noon the day before the election. Unfortunately, there is a reason required in order to absentee vote. The reasons are absent from the city, a religious belief, or disability preventing a voter access to the polls. Again, I thank you for inviting us to this meeting, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have in regards to the two dockets presented before us.
Did it again. And now we're going to go to Cheryl for any comments and kind of background on both dockets. I'm going to turn it over to you now. Cheryl Carl.
Great. Madam Chair and all councils present, thank you so much for the opportunity. I am Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, the Executive Director of Mass Vote. Mass Vote is a nonpartisan, nonprofit issue advocacy organization dedicated to voting rights, voting, and voter education. Today, we are speaking in support of dockets 0602 and 0603. As you know, docket 0602 would implement expanded early voting options like vote by mail and early in-person voting for all Boston municipal elections. Docket 063, meanwhile, would implement same-day voter registration for all Boston municipal elections. Mail-in voting, early in-person voting, and same-day voter registration are all proven reforms critical to making our democracy more accessible and inclusive. On mail-in and early voting, we have the examples of last year's state elections to base this case on. In both the 2020 September primary and November general election, a majority of voters cast their ballots early, either by mail or early in person. Additionally, both the primary and state election witnessed the highest turnout in decades. Last year, voters made it clear that they do not only approve of, but deeply value mail-in and early voting. They expect to have it moving forward, and Boston should meet that expectation by implementing it in all municipal elections. On same-day registration, we may not have, examples in Massachusetts to draw from, but we do have more than 20 cases that we can draw from nationwide. 20 states in the District of Columbia currently practice same-day registration, and the policy has proven highly effective. It has led to more streamlined elections as the need for costly, burdensome provisional ballots is virtually eliminated when a voter can correct their information on election day. It will also prove fairly easy to administer, as the city already possesses the necessary technology to do so, such as e-poll books. But the greatest benefit of same-day voter registration has nothing to do with administration or paperwork. It has to do with voter turnout. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, same-day registration is proven to increase voter turnout by as much as 7% across all demographics. Yet recent research by the national advocacy organization DEMOS goes even further, stating that Black and Latinx voter turnout is shown to increase by as much as 17% with same-day registration in place. In a city that is 25% Black and 20% Latinx, the value of this reform cannot be understated. The fact that Black and Latinx voters typically turn out at the lowest rates in Boston and across Massachusetts further signifies the importance of this reform. Given these results, both in Massachusetts and across the country, It is essential that the council approve dockets 0602 and 0603. Such reforms will have an immediate, dramatic, and most importantly, positive impact on the city's municipal elections. In approving these measures, the council may not only show that they seek to codify the reforms of last year, but go even further. Sending this message is incredibly important as state after state continues to make voting less accessible and the Supreme Court continues to support such efforts. Now is the time for Boston to stand up for the voting rights. By passing expanded early voting options and same-day voter registration, the city can do just that. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. I was hoping to go through some questions that I have. Councilor Royo, I didn't know if you had questions or thoughts and you wanted to drive the conversation, or if we could just open up for questions.
I think just opening it up for questions is fine.
Okay, because again, whenever Tanisha gets in here, as I stated before, she'll have the floor. Okay.
Yep, that's fine.
So if I understand correctly, this is more for Sabino and for Cheryl, and of course for the lead sponsor. Our experience, just for my education, we are experienced as a city in early voting in mail-in ballots by virtue of us having to do it for state elections, right? We've done that before, or in national.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, so just, and the reason why we need this home rule petition is because the State House gave themselves early voting, and they also gave the national elections early voting, but technically municipalities, cities, towns do not have early voting on the books. Correct?
I believe that's correct for municipal elections, yes.
Right. So
County
what
and
this,
state.
so what this is attempting to do is this a home rule just for Boston then, and just giving Boston that, or would you want this home rule to go for all municipalities or a general law? Councilor Royo.
So this one is just for Boston because we just have the ability to speak on our elections. You have struck a nail on the head there about what the state has not done in terms of what they're doing. On June 10th of this year, the State House passed legislation that would allow eligible registered folks to cast a ballot by mail permanently, but it would only apply to biennial state elections, state primaries, and any municipality whose elections are held at the same time as those state elections. So basically, it would leave our municipal elections on those years in which there are no state elections completely. We wouldn't have early voting or mail-in voting. We'd have this weird sort of thing going on where sometimes they'd have it, sometimes they wouldn't if you were voting for a city of Boston election.
And again, so all my questions right now, of course, on the early voting, but how does early voting get calculated in a special election? Does it count mail-in ballots? I guess it's a practical question for anybody at this point, but what happens then? Because we have specials, we have, how does that apply? Or is there an exception for special elections? And just a note, I actually think that's where the special elections are, where the voter turnout is, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes,
It's the worst, but also it should be, it's depending on the weather, depending on, all these different things, and people can and can't get to vote on a Tuesday. And I don't know, when was the last special election? It was the one in Revere. All those different things impact, and does the current laws apply to special elections and early voting?
Yeah, so this HRP would apply to the special elections. I'm not sure if what your question is whether or not if there's so the state does special elections quite often. And so I'm not sure if what you're saying is, does this apply to state special elections as well in terms of what they've already done or what we're doing? But this would apply to municipal special elections, which folks who are trying to figure out when that gets triggered, an at-large counselor is replaced by whoever is next in the order. But if a district counselor leaves during a specific time frame or resigns or retires or whatever happens, and they leave office at a specific time frame, there is a triggered special election for the district council seats. And there can be currently a triggered election for the mayor seat. And so this special election sort of formula, this whatever that is, this would apply to that as well. This would allow for same-day voter registration in the special. There's no delineation where we separate special elections as a non-City of Boston election. This would be for all City of Boston elections. If you're going to go vote for a City of Boston municipally elected, so that's your city council, your mayor, if you're going to go vote for that, this applies, whether it's a special or a general or preliminary.
The early voting too, then?
All of it.
All of it. Okay. And so that was my question also, is generally right now, because the State House, again, did early voting and mail-in for themselves and for national. This is, I guess, to Sabino, if there's a special election at the State House level, does early voting apply?
I believe the way the law is written, it does not apply. But because of these special acts that were placed in 2020 with COVID, any special elections that did take place had the ability to do vote by mail and early vote by in person early, which expired on June 30th.
Okay. All right. And then just wanted to make sure I had all my questions. So again, I'm still just on the early voting. Just to summarize, this basically brings the City of Boston in line with what the State House and federal elections already have. It allows for and has been proven to work, and the City of Boston has already implemented and used this, early voting, mail-in ballots already in these other elections, including our presidential and our recent State House elections as well. Right?
That is correct.
So this would make it for Boston, just so folks understand that 02 or 0602 early voting. Moving on to same day voting, and Councilor Arroyo, you mentioned what's the difference between the same day and election day, and why do you feel you need to address that? Or why
this is important, and Sabino might be helpful in sort of explaining what the complications would be if we did it one way and if we did it another, because obviously this is a working body, and if the council wants to change sort of that, keep that language so it's that way, then that's obviously their prerogative. But this is why I think it's better termed election day voting, because election day registration. What this comes down to is the tabulation and the way in which we count votes and how we protect voting. So if you do same day voter registration, that term has multiple meanings. The meaning and the way that we intend it to be is probably better explained as election day registration, which means on the preliminary date, you can register to vote. And on the actual election day, the general election day, you can register to vote, not the early voting days. The reason for that, as it was explained to me in conversation with the election department and with the Secretary of State, is that early voting registration, essentially when you go to vote early and they're trying to tabulate those, there's a process where they're getting thousands of sort of early vote ballots. And the way that which they tabulate that, they can't just tabulate somebody who same day registers, say, on an early voting date. I'm going to use this year, for instance. September 14th is the preliminary. If we have early voting the week before that, they would have to verify on election day that you actually still live in the City of Boston. So that would have to happen. So it would sort of not allow them to pre-tabulate those early voting votes, because they can't count you on, say, Monday the 7th, and then you move out of the city on Monday the 10th, and then your vote wouldn't actually be a valid vote on the 14th. So the way they take care of that is you can register to vote on the day of the election, because it allows them to then pre-tabulate all of those early ballots that happened without any concern that somebody who registered to vote and then moved out or isn't then a valid voter on the actual date of the election. So that's the purpose behind that. But what we have seen is that same day voter registration has a really deep impact. Same day, meaning election day, voter registration has a really deep impact on participation, especially in communities that are often locked out of elections, such as Latino, Black, disabled communities. Their numbers go up when you have same day voter registration. That's been borne out by the numbers. There's a better access for same day voter registration, because often I'm an elected official, and if you ask me right now, what's the last day you could register to vote in this election, I wouldn't know that off the top of my head. That's usually information that most people don't And so those are the kinds of things that happen. The other issue that I have seen come up, I've actually experienced this within people who I am actually very close to. They'll go to vote on a specific election day, and they won't actually be able to pull ballots, for instance, because they actually aren't registered the way they should be registered for that specific election. And so these are the kinds of things that we would be able to take care of if folks could do same day, as in same day election day registration. But the whole purpose for the difference or the differentiation is to allow for early voter tabulation. So when these thousands of early votes are coming in, they can put those to the side and they don't have to worry about whether or not those are still valid or good come election day. And Sabino might be able to answer that more in depth as to what that process is or why that process makes sense. But that's why I went that way instead of making it so that you could register every single day of that early voting period.
Just to be clear though, unlike early voting, this is not happening at all in Massachusetts, same day registration, right?
Precisely. This would be
Okay.
a step. This would be a step forward for the state.
Oh, I agree. I agree. But I want to be clear for folks to
Yeah.
understand where one is, we are already doing it just for different elections and we don't do it at ours. It's a different conversation. It's really, I think, really more like we should be consistent. You shouldn't have you can't have early voting only at the local level. That makes no sense. Versus with this particular one, which is why for some people it might be more controversial or more, yeah, whatever they want to call it. This would be new for the state.
And just to be clear, because we know
Just
that
the state though.
Yeah,
20 states
so
already
that
do
is
it.
accurate. That's accurate. And just to be clear in terms of how this was created, it's 2 dockets for a reason. So basically, if we send both of these up to the State House, and we know how that goes, if the State House decides that they like one, but they're not going to touch the other one, then at least we still get some of these voter access rights through. It doesn't kill the whole bill just because there's one article or part there that they say we don't like this because this is new and we don't do this. But I will say that none of these ideas are new. And
Right.
that idea specifically has been brought, I think it was state senators have put in 2 different.
Feingold.
Yeah, I think it's Feingold and Crean, I think both put that in there. The difference is, and I don't know whose it is, so apologies to our state senator for this, but one of them is like this. One of them says election day registration. The other one says every day of early voting registration. So that, but the idea is in the House already.
I understand Senator Feingold's version is actually filed on behalf of Secretary Galvin.
So that's the one that says election day registration.
Okay. So for folks who are watching, while Boston is leading the way on this, there are state senators doing this statewide. I haven't read it as closely as I would have liked to, but did the State House again reserve it only for their elections, or is it, did they give, do you know, in the versions pending, does it include municipal elections as well?
It's a good question. I actually don't know. I believe it's for both, but I'm actually gonna have to text my staff and make sure I know for sure whether or not the Senator Feingold one is allowing for municipal elections. Mr. Primanti, do you know? I know you were consulted on these.
No, I don't know, but our work in session, I believe, was for all elections, for the early voting piece and for the same day, election day.
Okay. But just for, again, that's the whole, the state, it speaks to either the State House can pass, get 2 bites at the apple for Boston. Boston could have 2 bites, I should say, excuse me. Either this home rule petition, and hopefully the State House has, with the same election day one, they have all municipalities. Or then again, it speaks to why we absolutely need this home rule petition, if the State House again reserved it just for their elections and national, and then we need city and municipalities to come through. So, okay, so those are so let's just let's answer questions that I know are coming in people's minds. So talk to me, I think Cheryl may be able to speak to this, about incidences of voter fraud, and talk to me about concerns that people may have about same-day registration and voter fraud. I think it's a what are the likelihood of this? I understand it's a very low incidence, but please, if you could speak to that so we can have that conversation.
That is correct. And there is very low incidence of voter fraud. I mean, tiny. And we took a team of town clerks to New Hampshire one year to witness what happens during same-day registration, to see how flawless and easy and simple the process in and is of itself. You know, you have to sign this, what do you call it, warranty?
Both an affidavit, I think.
Exactly, an affidavit, that's the correct word. That, you know, and then there's penalties that follow, but they don't have any cases of this. And so the whole fraud thing is just more of what people believe. You know, I always say we can hardly get people to vote one time, never mind to vote twice, you know, that kind of thing. If we could just get our numbers up and get people to vote once, we'd be happy. So we can't see that that's a real issue, but that seems to be, that always comes up, but it's not a valid concern.
Yeah, and I think Sabino might be a good person to speak to just fraud in general as somebody who's overseen the election department for a long time.
We get some complaints in regards to fraud, and we investigate any complaints that come to the office as soon as we receive the complaint. But it's very, very rare that we get those types of complaints.
So just to be clear, for same-day registration, you would need to produce an ID, right? On the day of, if I were to come in to vote, I would need to produce a driver's license. I'm trying to show that there's a check. There's a check in for the registration. The driver's license, a bill, or some sort of proof that you do reside is required.
Yes. So same rules as if you were going to register right now. This is actually what you would have to do. You would have to complete a registration application, which is the voter registration application. Then you have to provide proof of residency by multiple ways, which is one, you sign an oath, but two, you also have to provide a proof of residency, which could be a photo ID, could be a utility bill, could be a bank statement, government check, lease, mortgage, etc. There's a more of a list there, but you're signing an oath, you're filling out an application, and you're showing some proof of residency in documented form. Same way that you would do it if you were going to go register right now at the RMV or at City Hall. So there's no like shortcut. You don't just get to show up and say, I want to vote today. And they say, great, here you go. You still have to fill out all of the things you would not naturally have to fill out to prove proof of residency.
Right. And just so folks understand, that means that, yes, you could have moved in recently before the election, but you would still be a Boston resident and you would be allowed to vote. So I just want people to understand, we're not trying to have a bunch of folks come from other places, but yeah, I've had people move in, quote unquote, too late to vote in an election, but they live in that impacts their lives.
Yes,
and this would eliminate that. That
This
I have
also-
seen a lot of. I didn't
This would
register on time. I can't vote. That would eliminate this.
This would also sort of eliminate that confusion that I've seen sometimes when somebody moves in the city of Boston to another place in the city of Boston, and then on election day, they don't know what they're supposed to do because they've lived at a new address for 2-3 months, but they're registered to vote in the city, but they're registered to vote at a polling precinct that might be, say, in Alston, Brighton, but now they live in Hyde Park. And they have no idea what they're supposed to do. Now they can just go and make those changes right there on election day with no concern. And the one other thing I would say, just in terms of the ballot process, if somebody were to come and want to register to vote and doesn't have an ID, they would be able to pull a provisional ballot, which would then allow, it goes in a separate pile, doesn't get counted with those votes, and then they would get validated later. So it's not that, so also that would be part of it. If somebody showed up and said, oh, wow, I don't have some ID or something on me right this second, it wouldn't then make us turn them away. We would give them a provisional ballot that doesn't get counted in the regular count, goes to a separate place, gets looked at later by the election department to confirm their address and whether or not they're actually on that address and with those rolls. And so that's part of it. Also, I can confirm that the fine gold legislation is for all Massachusetts elections.
That's really great. So, I mean, I think I would assume we're going to hopefully be pushing a resolution in support of that, as well as this home rule petition, because I think this is it's a matter of consistency, and I do think that it's I've actually had even people in East Boston be in one precinct. I had to tell them, you can't vote at the high school, you have to go back over to such and such. and we were trying to figure out where they had to vote when it shouldn't have been that difficult. They know what their address is and they should be able to put in their address. I live in East Boston and I just, yeah, between precincts shouldn't be the reason why you don't vote or why you're not registered here versus there. So those are my questions. Councilor Braden, I didn't know if you had any questions.
I'm just wondering, I really feel that, in Alston Brighton, 75% of the renters in Alston Brighton change address on September 1st. So that automatically makes it very complicated. So I think this is a good idea. Proof of residency, proof of ID. Is there any question about citizenship if you're walking in on an election day if you've got a driver's license, this is always a question that people would ask about citizenship. But if you're in the process of becoming a citizen, you're not going to risk your possibility of becoming a citizen by being fraudulent. I know that from my own experience. So you're not going to mess up that process that takes years and years and a lot of money. So it's unlikely that that's going to be something that people will do or risk. But as you say, you'd be excited if you get people to vote once. You're not going to worry about voting twice. But also, I just feel that that's maybe a criticism that we're going to have come at us with regard to citizenship.
I do believe on the form right now to register, it specifically asks you if you are a U.S. citizen or not, check yes or no. And when you sign the form for the registration, it's under the pains and penalty of law. But I'll turn it over to the expert, Mr. Tremonte. My apologies go ahead.
Yeah, that is on the form. That is the first question on a registration form, or if you try to register online. Are you a citizen? And the other question it asks, which has to be adjusted for election day registration, is the fact of, are you 18? So you have to be 18 to vote and you have to be a citizen to vote. Okay. Right now, that 18 question is not on the registration form because we have pre-registrations for anyone that's 16 years of age or older.
Very good. And the other question is more for you, Sabino, is in terms of logistics and costs. I know last year your department did an incredible job, I have to say. Early voting, mail-in voting in an election presidential year in the middle of a COVID epidemic. You did an amazing job. In terms of implementing this policy going forward, do you foresee additional staff requirements or needing to appropriate extra funds to deliver on this policy?
We as a department are still reviewing those processes that we took during the COVID. We had a lot of volunteers from other agencies, departments that were working remotely and came in and helped and volunteered and assisted us with the mailing. So I agree, yes, the budget will most likely go up. We'll definitely need more personnel because we will not have those resources that we had in 2020 to have volunteers come in and help us in the manner that we needed. I hope that answers your question.
No, that does. There's always a price attached to these things, and it's good to put that into the mix as well. Not that should stop us doing the right thing. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know. Well, I do. Go ahead,
Madam Chair, can I just add one more thing to let Councilor Arroyo? We do not require an identification when you're registering. The only time that we require identification or proof of residency is when someone is voting for the first time in Massachusetts that has not participated in any previous federal election. If this is their first time participating and their license or their last digits of last four digits of the social do not match the central registry lookup system, then they will be required to provide identification. Other than that, we do not ask for identification when they are registering.
So you asked for proof of residency though?
No, we do not. It's not required. They're
So
signing their
it's
oath.
just the oath in the application.
That is correct.
Okay. And then there's a check, I'm assuming, off the oath in the application if something doesn't check out.
That is correct. When we enter a registration into our database, we enter the identification numbers they provide to us, whether it's last 4 digits of the social or their license. And if it does not match our central voter registration system lookup tool, which is the Social Security database or the RMV database, there will be a requirement for them to provide identification at the polls when they go to vote.
And so I guess you answered sort of a question that Councilor Braden brought forward about folks who might not be fully citizen. They might be going through the process, or they might not have documentation. But in terms of the 2 things that you look at that are required, one of which is required on that form, it's either the Social Security number or the license number.
That's correct.
And neither one of those can you actually have in Massachusetts currently, unless you are a citizen. And so that
Right.
so that
Yeah.
makes sense there.
But if you're not a citizen, you should not be registering until you become a citizen.
Well, it
Never
sounds like you
pre-register.
can't even, it sounds like you can't even register because you need a Social Security number or a license number, and we don't allow for licenses in Massachusetts, and or security numbers Social Security numbers aren't given out.
That's correct. And
Yeah.
the first question on the application is, are you a citizen? So at the time that you're filling out that form, if you're not a citizen, you should not fill it out.
Okay. And so, Madam Chair, Tanisha Sullivan has reached out to me. She won't be able to make it today. There's something that's happening. She's not going to be able to be here. I do have a question that you may not have the answer to, Mr. Piemonte, but I know that in Massachusetts, there was a total of 365. So like 3,657,972 votes, which were cast in 2020 with all of the early voting mail-in procedures for Massachusetts. That's about 76% of Massachusetts registered voters, and is actually a record by about 300,000 additional votes over 2016, which was the last one. And I know that in that number, that 3,657,000, that about 2.6 million people voted by mail or early voting, which is the vast majority of that number. Almost double the amount of people who voted did it by mail or by early voting than folks who did it just on election day in person. Do you know what that was in Boston? Do you have some idea as to what the percentage was in Boston of voters who opted for early voting or mail-in voting as opposed to same-day voting?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I do know we had more turnout through early voting in person and by mail than actual in-person on election day. Don't quote me on the number, but I'd like to say about 115 to 120,000 people of the close to 300,000 voted in person on election day.
So
I can get you those numbers.
Yeah, so it sounds like more than half though decided to early vote or mail vote.
That's correct.
And then in terms of, this is the sort of the cascading effect of voter access. Did that lead to less lines and faster voting for folks who did decide to go vote in person on the day of? I know we're going to be dealing with re-precincting and maybe and all of these different things where we're talking about the size of these precincts and how many people are there. Did you get less reports of sort of elongated lines or easier access to actual in-person voting because so many people voted early and weren't in those lines on election day?
Yes, definitely less lines at a lot of these precincts. The other thing that did assist and help us was the central tabulation, where we did not have to send those ballots out to be tabulated at the precinct level, even though they voted by mail or in person on early voting days. So that was a huge help, where we started processing those ballots a week in advance of the election. And they were stored securely in our vault under lock and key. And that was an extremely helpful exercise that we took place in. We counted almost 60,000 ballots that way.
And so just so I understand what you're saying, basically, I want to make sure I'm clear. You were able to count those ballots before election day, which meant on election day, your staff was less overburdened because you got those ballots counted prior to the influx of election day votes? Is that like it basically was spread out instead of all at once?
That is correct. In the past, we did not have the ability to do central tabulation with early voting in play. And we'd have to send all those ballots out to the precinct level to be tabulated in conjunction with any voters that were waiting in line on election day.
Okay, so that sounds like you spread your work out in a more
Yes.
efficient manner when you have early voting.
Yes.
Okay, that's all helpful for me. I don't know, other than I don't know if you're allowed to, Mr. Piemonte, speak in favor of or in support of sort of these measures, but generally speaking, what happened in 2020 was that in terms of allowing you to do early voter tabulation, allowing for sort of early voter access, in terms of how that impacted the election department, would you say that those changes made life for you? Obviously, there was more work because there was major elections in the pandemic, but would you say that spreading it out and doing it in that way made life at the election department easier for the city workers who work there, as opposed to if we had just had all of those votes come in on the day of and we only counted votes on the preliminary date, or in that case, in the national election, the primary date and the final?
Yeah, I believe, and this is a belief of mine and the commissioner, I believe, but she can speak on her own when she has time. By spreading it out the way we did have an impact on more work for us, but it alleviated a lot of stress on election day. If we had to send 140 or 150,000 ballots out to the precincts that were voted ballots, the security of getting them out to every single precinct, the security of getting them back to us at the end of the night, the additional poll workers we had to hire during a pandemic, which then would have caused us to have overloaded precincts with the amount of people that we were allowed in all the facilities, which would have limited how many voters could have stayed in line to vote. So yes, it was a very tactical operation that we used, and it was very beneficial for the department, and the city, and all the voters that had to participate in person.
And I'm just going to end by echoing Councilor Braden. You guys are sort of unsung heroes. I think everybody knows, at least people who pull papers to run for office, how great the election department is. But this last year with the pandemic, you folks had election after election happening, and we're just going at it as best you could, and you did a really great job. I don't think we saw a single negative thing come out of your elections, and seeing how New York just sort of handled theirs. Very appreciative that you are running our election department. So thank you for the work you do.
Councilor Braden, and then we'll very likely close out. Councilor Braden.
I had a question for Sabino again about early voting tabulation, because I know that campaigns want to know who's voted early so that they can track their prospective voters. Is that how onerous is that in terms of giving a real sort of fairly up-to-date information to campaigns as early voting is proceeding?
That information was available on a daily basis if campaigns requested it. And what we could do is share that information as it's requested. But it is available, yes.
And it's sort of on a case-by-case
Yes.
request, driven by a request. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you all so much. So I intend to get these to a working session with any language suggestions, and then present to our body for a vote relatively soon. Thank you for your leadership, Councilor Arroyo. Thank you so much for attending today again, Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, for your perspective and also providing background. And of course, again, to Sabino Piemonte and the elections department in total for all your hard work. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to close up today's hearing. Have a good day.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.